There were 6 major offices of the Kingdom of Jerusalem: the constable, the marshal, the seneschal, the chamberlain, the butler and the chancellor. At certain times there were also bailiffs, viscounts and castellans. Essentially, these officers developed from the typical officials that existed in northern France in the 11th century, the homeland of the first kings of Jerusalem. The offices continued to develop in France and England, but in Jerusalem they tended to develop more slowly and not at all, taking on different roles than the European counterparts. The lists given below are incomplete, as the specific names and dates of the offices are sometimes unknown. After the fall of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the officers were sometimes awarded as honors by the kings of Cyprus and Jerusalem. Constables. The constable commanded the army, paid mercenaries and judged legal cases pertaining to the military. He was the most important officer in the kingdom, due to the almost constant state of warfare that existed between the Christian and Muslim states. The constable was officially the second in command of the army, in which he exercised police authority and commanded a division twice as large as all others. In addition, constables also determined the boundaries and borders of the kingdom. During the coronation, the constable would hold the king's horse. Simon, Hugh Corlus, Eustace Grenier, William I of Bues, Manasses of Hierges, Humphrey II of Toron, Amalric of Lusignan, John of Ibolin, Walter of Montbelliard, Odo of Montbelliard, Philip of Montfort, John of Ibolin, William of Bertrand, Balian of Arsuf, Richard of Neublans, Simon of Montelif, Baldwin of Ibolin, Amalric of Lusignan, Philip of Brunswick-Grubenhagen, Peter of Lusignan. Marshals. The marshal was next in command to the constable. He led the mercenaries and was in charge of the army's horses, and distributed the spoils of a victorious battle. On coronation day, the marshal would assist the constable. Sado, Eudes of St. Amand, Jocelyn of Edessa, William, Gerard of Pugy, John, Gerard of Rydfort, Walter Duras, Hugh Martin, Arnulf, John, Aymar of Laron, James of Dournay, Riccardo Filangieri, Philip of Cossey, Geoffrey of Sargines, John of Giblet, William Canet, James Vidal. Seneschals. The office of seneschal in Jerusalem never achieved the prominence of its European counterparts, but was important nonetheless. The seneschal administered the coronation ceremony, oversaw the haute court in the king's absence, administered royal castles, and managed the royal finances and revenue. The seneschal's power was over only viscounts and not castellans, and the constable was still superior to the seneschal due in part to the kingdom's constant state of war. During coronations, the seneschal would hold the royal scepter and oversee the coronation feast. The office was similar to, but not as developed as, the English office of the Exchequer. Hugh of St. Omer, Gervais, Hugo Chostard, Anchirius, Isaac, John, Guy Lefrancois, Miles of Plancy, Ralph, Jocelyn of Edessa, Obitus Nepos, Ralph of Tiberias, Raymond of Giblet, Baldwin of Ibolin, Geoffrey of Sargines, Robert of Cresk, Genii de Grailly, Eudes Pelagian, Philip of Ibolin. Chamberlains. The chamberlain administered the royal household and its servants, and had other honorary duties such as administering oaths. On coronation day, the chamberlain would robe the king. He had his own fief from which he drew his salary. Strabylon, Geoffrey, Gerard, John, Ralph, Jocelyn, Miles, Nicholas, Gorvan de la Roche, Gerard of Pugy, Amalric of Lusignan, John, Raymond, Balian of Ibolin, Thomas, Henry of Canelli, John, Roard of Caiphas, Renaud of Caiphas, John of Cossey, Philip of Cossey. Butlers. The butler was in charge of the royal table and also administrated the kingdom's vineyards. Winric, Gervais, pagan. Robert Crispin, Eudes of St. Amand, Miles. Chancellors. The chancellor drew up deeds and charters and managed the kingdom's diplomatic service. The chancellery is an interesting example of the fossilization of 11th-century offices. It consisted of only a few secretaries and scribes, and never became the large administrative bureaucracy that had developed elsewhere in Europe. Chancellors tended to be clergymen who often became bishops or archbishops, sometimes while still holding the chancellery. The relative unimportance of the chancellor reflects the relative decentralization of royal authority as compared to states like France or England, that were at the same time becoming more centralized. Arnul, pagan. Aemilianus, Franco. Helius, Ralph, Bishop of Bethlehem. Frederick, Archbishop of Tyre. William, Archbishop of Tyre. Lambert, Bandinus, in Tyre. Peter, Bishop of Tripoli. Eudes, Josias, Archbishop of Tyre. Ralph, Bishop of Sidon. Simon, Archbishop of Tyre. Meregnon, bailiffs. The bailiff administered the kingdom in the absence of minority of the king, in the capacity of a regent, for example, during the captivity of Baldwin II, and the youth and illness of Baldwin IV. In the 13th century the bailiff ruled essentially as a king himself, and was the most powerful man in the kingdom, as the kings were usually foreign monarchs who did not live permanently in the kingdom. Eustace Grenier, William I of Buez, Miles of Plancy, Raymond III of Tripoli, Raynald of Chatillon, Guy of Lusignan, Raymond III of Tripoli, John of Ibolin, Hugh of Montbelliard, Thomas of Calen, Richard Filangieri at Tyre, Odo of Montbelliard at Acre, Walter Penenpie at Acre, John of Ibolin, John Fainan, John of Arsuf, John of Ibolin, John of Arsuf, Geoffrey of Sargines, Balian of Ibolin, Roger of San Severino, Odd Ope Walchin, Philip of Ibolin, viscounts and castellans. These two offices were sometimes held by one person and sometimes held by two separate people. Sometimes one or the other was not held at all. They were named by the king and occupied the Tower of David, but the specific duties are mostly unknown and were probably not particularly important. One of the duties of the viscount was apprehending criminals and administering justice in the lower-class burgess court. Like the office of butler, these officers may not have survived the move to Acre. Anselm, Pisolus, and Scatinus, Raud the Elder, Arnul, Eudes of St. Amand, Raud the Younger, Peter of Cresseto, Balian of Jaffa, Peter of Cresseto. Citations